Today, we will recall the most devastating train crashes of the 20th and 21st centuries, stories of mistakes, fateful decisions, and lessons learned at the cost of human lives. The events that took place on July 24th, 2013, near Santiago de Compostela, became one of the most tragic pages in the modern history of rail transport in Spain and Europe. On that hot July day, the Alvia high-speed passenger train, traveling from Madrid to Ferrol and carrying people returning from holidays and pilgrimages, entered a curve at a speed significantly exceeding the permitted limit, after which the train derailed, several cars overturned and were seriously damaged, leading to extensive destruction and a large number of deaths and injuries. Witnesses described moments of panic when a normal routine journey suddenly turned into chaos. Cries for help, twisted metal, smoke from burnt materials, and urgent attempts to extract people from the wreckage. Rescue teams, fire departments, and medical teams arrived at the scene immediately, but the broken train cars made it difficult to reach the victims and evacuate them. In the first hours after the crash, local hospitals and emergency rooms were overwhelmed. Ambulance crews worked non-stop, and volunteers and residents of nearby towns rushed to help, bringing water, blankets, and moral support. The tragedy caused a profound public response. Mourning events and flash mobs were held across the country. Flowers and candles were laid on the streets, and relatives of the victims demanded truth and justice, insisting on a thorough investigation of all the circumstances of the accident. The investigation, which began immediately, focused on technical indicators, flight recorders, and human factors. Experts noted that speed limits on this section of track were critical, and that the absence or inadequate implementation of automatic control and braking systems could have been one of the key factors contributing to the tragedy. As evidence and testimony were gathered, the investigating authorities published interim reports that highlighted the need to improve infrastructure, revise safety protocols, and enhance the training of locomotive crews. Legal proceedings and administrative procedures continued for a long time. The families of the victims and public organizations demanded accountability, while railway operators and supervisory authorities, under public pressure, promised to carry out reforms and invest in technologies aimed at preventing similar incidents from happening again. The political reaction led to discussions about the priorities of public-private partnerships in the transport sector, the need to increase budgets for the modernization of the rail network, and the introduction of stricter requirements for locomotive control and automatic braking systems. Beyond the legal aspects, the tragedy sparked intense public debate on safety culture. Journalists and public figures emphasized that economic considerations should not take precedence over human lives and called for constant monitoring of compliance with regulations and standards. In the professional community, engineers and researchers began to analyze the data in detail, examine design and organizational errors, propose technical improvements, learn from mistakes, and initiate staff training programs. Social support for the victims and families of those who died became one of the most important tasks. Dozens of charitable and public initiatives organized fundraising, psychological assistance, and legal support for those affected by the accident. The memory of the victims has been immortalized in memorials and annual mourning ceremonies in Santiago de Compostela and throughout the country, while the stories of survivors and rescuers have been recorded as testimonies of human resilience and solidarity in the face of disaster. The years since have shown that lessons can be learned from tragedy. Programs to introduce modern speed control and automatic braking systems have been accelerated. Track maintenance and signaling procedures have been strengthened, and protocols for emergency services to work together in emergencies have been revised. Nevertheless, for many families, the loss remains irreplaceable, and the memory of those who did not return home continues to prompt discussion about responsibility and the need for constant monitoring of passenger transport safety. As a result, the crash near Santiago became not only a tragic page in the history of railways, but also a powerful stimulus for reforms, for increased attention to the human factor, and technical means of protection. as well as for strengthening public control and transparency in matters on which the lives and safety of millions of people depend. To this day, references to those July days serve as a reminder that any disregard for safety rules can have catastrophic consequences, and that preserving the lives of passengers must remain the highest priority in transport policy and practice. Rescue workers, medical teams, and volunteers worked around the clock to develop evacuation plans, provide medical assistance, and support the families of those affected. The public demanded a transparent and objective investigation, and transport authorities came under heavy criticism for underfunding safety systems and failing to modernize them in a timely manner. As the process progressed, technical details, witness statements, and flight recorder data became available, enabling a comprehensive review of locomotive training protocols. The serious train crash that occurred near the town of Gotha in northern Sindh province, Pakistan, in mid-July 2005 was one of those tragedies that remained in people's memories not only because of the scale of the destruction, but also because of the dramatic human stories witnessed by rescuers, passengers, and residents of nearby villages and towns witnessed. On that ill-fated day, a chain collision occurred on the track. A passenger train stopped for technical reasons. The next train crashed into its cars, and then a third train crashed into the resulting chaos, leading to the destruction of many cars and a huge number of casualties. Eyewitnesses described scenes in which, amid twisted metal and torn-out seats, people were calling their loved ones, trying to get out of the rubble, and were in a state of shock, while cries for help and rescue teams' commands could be heard all around. The nearest emergency services, local residents and volunteers, medical teams, and firefighters immediately rushed to the scene of the accident, but the difficult terrain and torn-apart carriages seriously complicated the rescue operation. For many hours, and even days, rescuers manually extracted people from the wrecked sections, recovered the bodies of the dead, and provided first aid to the injured on the spot, loading them into ambulances and sending them to overcrowded local hospitals. Resuscitation teams worked tirelessly, surgeons performed emergency operations, and relatives who had arrived at the scene waited in fear and despair for news about the fate of their loved ones. The disaster caused a widespread public reaction within the country and attracted the attention of international organizations, which expressed their condolences and offered assistance. Journalists followed the developments, covering the situation, publishing the testimonies of survivors, and chronicling the rescue operation. The investigation into the causes of the accident revealed that it was due to a combination of factors: human error in traffic management, inadequate technical signaling and braking systems, as well as structural problems with the infrastructure and network overload, which together led to the tragic outcome. Reports and subsequent discussions emphasized the role of outdated mechanisms and the lack of modern automatic speed control and remote braking systems, the introduction of which could have prevented the chain collision or significantly reduced its consequences. The authorities announced the need to conduct a comprehensive review of railway safety standards, revise maintenance and staff training protocols, and accelerate work on modernizing signaling and traffic control. But the implementation of such measures faced financial and organizational difficulties. Numerous families of the victims and injured demanded justice and compensation, organizing collective appeals and lawsuits, while social activists and human rights organizations sought transparency in the investigation and an open report on the results of the inspections. The memory of the victims lived on in the hearts of the communities. Temporary memorials were erected near the accident site, and in neighboring settlements, mourning ceremonies and religious prayers were held, and volunteers organized aid collections for the families of those who had lost their breadwinners. The tragedy also became a topic of professional discussion among engineers and transport experts. Seminars were held to analyze the causes of accidents. Industry conferences and initiatives were organized to exchange experiences with international partners, where attention was focused on the need for a systematic approach to safety, including investment, training, and strict quality control of rolling stock and track infrastructure. Public discussion of the accident touched on a broader context, issues of state financing of infrastructure, investment priorities between new projects and maintenance of existing lines, and relations between private operators and state regulatory bodies. For many, this was a lesson that cutting corners on safety and neglecting maintenance can have irreversible consequences, and that mechanisms need to be put in place to continuously monitor the condition of the tracks and respond quickly to technical failures. In the years that followed, some of the recommendations made after the accident were implemented. Work was carried out to strengthen sections of the track, signaling systems were upgraded, and training programs for locomotive crews were introduced, although implementing all the changes took time and significant resources. Finally, the human stories from that night, stories of rescue, sacrifice, and mutual aid, remain forever in the memory of those who survived the disaster. Stories of those who risked their lives to pull strangers from mangled train cars, of neighbors who took in the injured, and of medical workers who worked tirelessly, became symbols of resilience and solidarity in the face of tragedy. And although no reforms or compensation can bring back the lives that were lost, the tragedy in Gotki served as a powerful reminder that transport safety requires constant public attention, urgent investment, and responsibility from all links in the transport chain to prevent such disasters from happening again. On February 28, 2023, a terrible train crash occurred near the Tempe Valley in central Greece when a passenger train traveling between the capital and the northern port city collided head-on with a freight train, resulting in the instant destruction of several cars, a powerful explosion of fuel and combustible materials, and a wave of panic among passengers. The nighttime incident came as a shock to the entire country. There were many students and young people on the route, returning from weekends and holidays, and scenes from the scene showed twisted metal, burning debris, and people trying to escape from the wrecked compartments. Rescue services arrived quickly, but the scale of the destruction and the intensity of the fire seriously complicated the work of the rescuers. Medics and firefighters worked for hours without a break, carrying out the injured and recovering the bodies of the dead, while local residents and volunteers brought water and blankets and helped as best they could. The tragedy shook society. Spontaneous mourning events took place across the country. People lit candles, brought flowers, and demanded justice, while the investigation became the subject of constant attention in the press and among citizens. The investigation revealed a complex set of causes: human error in traffic management, outdated infrastructure, and insufficient automation of safety systems, including the delayed introduction of modern speed control and centralized dispatch management systems, which together created the conditions for a fatal mistake. Hundreds of families faced loss and grief. Many loved ones waited for news about their relatives in a state of anxiety and despair, and the long hours of searching and identifying bodies became an unbearable ordeal for entire communities. The political reaction was swift and inevitable. Transport industry leaders and government officials came under heavy criticism. Resignations and announcements of plans to reform the system followed. But many citizens considered these measures insufficient and demanded a transparent and thorough investigation to determine who was responsible. Public protests and railway worker strikes highlighted the accumulated tension and dissatisfaction with the state of the network, while experts pointed to the need for urgent investment in track modernization, signaling upgrades, and the introduction of electronic safety systems capable of preventing human error. Numerous reports and expert opinions that emerged after the initial investigations highlighted systemic gaps, a lack of maintenance, the absence of a unified, centralized control system, and poor funding, all of which combined to make the system vulnerable and unsuitable for modern speeds and transport volumes. The memory of those who died was immortalized in memorials and annual events commemorating those who lost their lives that night. Public events, church services, and rallies became a place where relatives and friends could gather, remember, and demand accountability. For specialists, This disaster became the subject of in-depth professional analysis. Engineers, designers, and infrastructure project managers discussed how to implement safety systems in practice, how to improve staff qualifications, and how to organize the interaction of emergency services for a quick and coordinated response to similar incidents. Social initiatives and charitable projects provided support for the victims. Aid funds were set up, psychological programs and legal assistance were organized for families seeking compensation and justice in court. Time has passed, but the wound remains. The events of that night continue to influence transport policy, public opinion, and ideas about how public funds should be prioritized to ensure the safety of citizens. At the same time, touching stories of human solidarity emerged. Tales of rescuers and ordinary people who risked their lives for their neighbors, of those who brought food and helped care for the injured, served as a reminder that even in the most dire situations, people can show the best side of their character. Ultimately, the Tempe crash was not only a tragedy for individuals, but also a catalyst for change. Commitments to modernization, enhanced control, and increased accountability were made at the highest level. And although the reform process has been slow, public demand for safety has been a constant stimulus for change. This story served as a reminder that infrastructure and technology cannot replace human attention and professionalism, but also that neglecting to update systems and cutting corners on safety can lead to catastrophic consequences, and that the only acceptable goal for society is to make travel safe for every person, regardless of age or social status. Investigations and court proceedings dragged on for years, revealing new details about the institutional failures and organizational miscalculations that led to the tragedy. Charges were brought against station employees and managers, and the public demanded with vigilance that those responsible be held accountable and that the safety system be completely reviewed and updated. And we remember. We have come to the end of this episode, but the memory of those who suffered in the train crashes will remain with us for a long time. Each event is not just a line in the chronicle, but human destinies, families, and stories that force us to rethink our priorities for safety and control. Technology and investigations change the rules, but decisions are made by people. So accountability and transparency remain key elements of change. The memory of those who died is honored not only with memorials and anniversaries, but also with concrete actions, investing in infrastructure modernization and implementing automatic control systems, improving crew qualifications, and practicing emergency service coordination. Support for victims and their families is an essential part of the response, as is public oversight of the fulfillment of promises. We remember, we learn, and we demand that human life remain the highest priority. It is our duty. Traveling from Madrid to Ferrol and carrying people returning from holidays and pilgrimages entered a curve at a speed significantly exceeding the permitted limit, after which the train derailed, several cars overturned and were seriously damaged, leading to extensive destruction and a large number of deaths and injuries. Witnesses described moments of panic when a normal routine journey suddenly turned into chaos, cries for help, twisted metal, smoke from burnt materials, and urgent attempts to extract people from the wreckage. Rescue teams, fire departments, and medical teams arrived at the scene immediately, but the broken train cars made it difficult to reach the victims and evacuate them. In the first hours after the crash, local hospitals and emergency rooms were overwhelmed. Ambulance crews worked non-stop, and volunteers and residents of nearby towns rushed to help, bringing water, blankets, and moral support.